video we'll think about what and who media producers are and what and who media consumers are. This probably sounds super simple and something that we really wouldn't need to have a whole key content video about. But as we start to delve into the questions, you'll realise that the landscape of media producers and consumers is a bit more complex than you might originally have thought. Our first question is, do all media providers have the same responsibilities? This is an important question because the answer to it lets us see that it's not just a case of a media producer just making whatever piece of media they want to make and putting it out there. In broadcast media, so TV and radio mainly, the two main categories are public service broadcasters and commercial broadcasters. Pause the video here, note down what you think the difference between them is, and then do a quick Google search to check. So, what did you find out? Public service broadcasters have a responsibility to the clues in the name, the public, and commercial broadcasters have a responsibility to their shareholders and advertisers. It's a bit like the difference between public services like the NHS or the education system in this country, in some countries these things are not public services, and private business. A public service is supposed to be run for the public good of all, whereas a private business, provided it's run legally, can focus on whatever activities will make it the most profit. In the media landscape you're used to, the main public service broadcaster is the BBC. The full-on commercial broadcasters are Sky, Virgin and other paid-for channels, and ITV and channels 4 and 5 are somewhere in between. They run on a mixed model with some public funding from the licence fee and some funding from advertising. RTE similarly runs on a mixed model. It is mostly public service, but there are some ads. Public service broadcasters should provide content that is diverse and inclusive, and that speaks to and represents minority groups as well as majority groups, and the main proportion of which is homegrown content. In addition, their news provision should be impartial and balanced. Commercial broadcasters, on the other hand, can be what's called populist. They can broadcast more of the shows that are popular with more people, and they don't have to bother with shows that only a minority of people would be interested in. Think about it from the point of view of the advertisers. You want your advert to be shown during a show that a lot of people are watching. Commercial broadcasters' news provision can take a point of view, as the image shows. As an aside, the same is true of the press. That having been said, there is a difference between taking a point of view and what is called editorializing, where news providers present opinion as if it is fact. If they are taking an editorial position, they should be clear about the fact that they are doing so and the fact that what they are saying is opinion. Pause the video here and decide whether you think public service broadcasting or commercial broadcasting is better for society, or whether a mix is best. Our next question is, does it make sense to make a clear distinction between media producers and media consumers, particularly when it comes to news? To put it another way, you probably think of yourself, for now at least, as a media consumer. But are you just a media consumer? Historically, there was a very clear boundary between media producers and media consumers. Producers made the media and consumers read it, listened to it or watched it. It then began to become more of a dialogue. Think about radio shows that enable people to phone in and make points, or TV shows that display texts and tweets that come in from people. There was a particular shift in this regard in news media. As newspapers increasingly launched web versions in the 90s and noughties, an opportunity for comments on news stories became the norm. As mobile phones became more complex with camera and video capability, I know anything before mobile video seems like ancient history to most of you folks, but really in the wider context of media history, it is really quite recent. We began to see what was termed user-generated content. This was where regular people who found themselves at the scene of something newsworthy would take photos or some footage of the event on their phones and send it to a mainstream news provider or share it themselves. As people started to construct news stories from their pictures or footage rather than just sending it in to media providers, citizen journalism was born. Pause the video and have a think about whether or to what extent this development in citizen journalism is a good thing. You could Google and gather opinions about this question. If you do that, try to differentiate between those opinions that are coming from people who could be considered to be experts on this stuff, or people who are just regular people, or people who are maybe campaigners for a particular thing and therefore have an agenda one way or the other. So, what did you think about the benefits or challenges of citizen journalism? And/or what did you find out about what others think? We could argue that citizen journalism changes power relationships and gives more people a voice. In that sense, we could see it as more democratic, perhaps. On the other hand, professional journalists undergo a lot of training in how to do journalism professionally, and they have ethical codes to stick to. So perhaps citizen journalism strips away the ethics and the responsibility a bit, which could have implications for the wider public's understanding of the issue. It's perhaps not as simple an answer as it at first might seem. You'll be noticing that this is the case with lots of things on this module. Raising questions about things can be just as important as giving answers to things, so do try to start thinking questioningly sometimes. If we step away from the news context for a moment and think about the balance between what we consume and what we produce on social media, some of which is news related of course, if we have an interest in news and current affairs, it's quite striking how much media production we actually do, isn't it? You might think, well, I'm not an influencer or anything, I don't make videos from scratch, etc. But even when you share something, you're playing a part in media production. And if you put a comment with the thing you share, even more so. Think again about our consideration of intertextuality in the genre fact and fiction video. A meme is a perfect example of intertextuality because it takes an often recognised image or scenario and glosses it with some words, thus echoing something previous and recasting it both at the same time. And if we share someone else's meme with a comment on it, that's us engaging in even more intertextuality. Pause the video here and think about your own media consumption and production. See if you can quantify the balance. Try to estimate what percentage of your media engagement is consumption and what percentage is production. For example, maybe you're 80% consumption, 20% production, or if you're quite active and creative with your social media, maybe it's more like 60-40. Now that we've thought about where the boundary is between media producers and media consumers, or if there even is one, we're going to shift our focus squarely onto media consumers and think about some of the theories and models that different thinkers have developed to try to capture the relationship between media consumers and the media they consume. When you're consuming media, for example, watching a TV programme, reading news, exploring a website, would you say you're passive or active? Why not pause the video and ponder that for a second? The first and oldest and most traditional model of media audiences is the media effects model, also known as the hypodermic needle model. It was developed by the Frankfurt School. When we talk about a particular school having developed an idea, that doesn't refer to some young people sitting in their secondary school and suddenly morphing into heavy-duty academics. It just means that there was a recognisable group of people working on and thinking about broadly the same areas of theory and usually in the same place geographically, in the past at least. In this case, it was in Frankfurt in Germany, hence the Frankfurt School. The hypodermic needle model thinks of the audience as passive. Think about what happens when you get an injection. Something gets put into you and that's that. Of course, if you're getting it, you want to get it and you're happy to get it and it's a good thing, but you don't actually have any influence on the effect it has on you. It just has the effect it has. It's a one-way process. This is used as an analogy for messages from the media basically just entering the audience's heads and being accepted for what they are. You might be wondering why there's a swastika on this image, and you might feel quite uncomfortable about that. It's just there because the hypodermic needle model developed largely due to concerns about how Nazi propaganda had affected people and made them believe untruths and subsequently ostracize particular groups of people and worse. The members of the Frankfurt School thought that all powerful media could potentially work in a similar way, and they worried that powerful people would dupe the rest of us into believing their way of thinking. What do you think about the hypodermic needle model? Do you think there's anything in it? Do you think that it still has any validity in relation to how we engage with the media today, or do you think it's outdated? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Next, along came the uses and gratifications model, which was developed by Blumler and Katz and further developed by McQueel. The clue is very much in the name with this one. It sees media consumers as using media and gratifying themselves with it. The consumer is not passively fed and controlled by the media, but instead actively uses the media for various purposes. An obvious way we use the media is for information. We use various forms of news media to keep ourselves informed about what's going on in the world and what different people are saying about what's going on in the world. Another use we make of the media is escapism, which can be a useful thing sometimes when we want to get away from work and the news and study and so on. There is nothing wrong with a good old fluffy rom-com to escape into. We can also make use of the media psychologically and for self-development purposes. Think about when you watch soap operas, dramas, or reality TV. Do you ever compare yourself to one or more of the characters in the show? Maybe that helps you understand more about yourself, or maybe it's a case of differentiating strongly from the character and feeling glad that you are not like them. So, there are lots of uses and gratifications we can get from the media. Do you think the uses and gratifications model makes sense? Maybe you think there's something in it, but that it is too positive or hopeful about an all-powerful consumer. Is it really the case that we deal so intelligently and positively with the media? And is it never the case that we watch something with an agenda that pulls us in a direction that means we are not very empowered at all? Do we instead need to find a midpoint between the two extreme theories? The two-step flow model is perhaps a good midpoint. It was developed by Paul Lazarsfeld, Bernard Berelson and Hazel Godet. It sees media consumption as going through two steps. Firstly, the show or other form of media is consumed by us. But crucially, secondly, it is further mediated, reinterpreted or reproduced by opinion makers and local networks. Who these people are is dependent, I think, on our age and also on the age in which we live. When we're very young, we're likely to have the media reproduced by our parents. We might hear something on the news and then ask our parents about it, for example, or see something on a TV drama or film that we don't quite get and ask our parents to explain what's going on. As we get older, the opinion former might be the cool kid at school or a celebrity we look up to. And when we're older again, it might be a lifestyle or political commentator. Do you ever watch Gogglebox? I think it's a really nice illustration of the two-step flow in action. We're watching people watching TV and commenting on it. So there are two steps. We can see what they're watching and we watch it with them as we watch the show, but we also hear their take on it. These people are of course not opinion formers as such, but they certainly haven't been chosen randomly. And there are people with different takes on life, different political views, and so on. There are also people with a really humorous take on the media and politics, and there is a lot of comedy in some of the people's responses to the media they are watching. The two-step flow is, I think, really relevant these days with the rise of the social media influencer over the past decade or so. People of the student generation almost all follow some social media influencers, and almost all social media influencers reproduce or challenge the media in some way, whether that be explicitly or whether it be more subtly in the sense of how they interact with ideological norms, for example. Another useful set of concepts to help us think about ways in which the relationship between producers and audience has shifted is push media versus pull media. This concept was developed by Matheson to refer to the fact that the direction and process of the media message is changing. Media producers used to make the choices and push these on the consumers. For example, when I was a young child, there were only 3 terrestrial TV channels, and very few people had video recorders. So things were on when they were on, and you watched them when they were on, or you didn't see them. Fast forward to now, and we have multiple digital channels, both free to view and pay to view. We can choose what to watch and when. We can pause and rewind live TV, and so on. The media consumer now pulls things towards themselves. Pause the video here and reflect on whether you think this is a good or bad development for the consumer. What did you decide? Perhaps it seems like a no-brainer to you that it's absolutely a good thing, because media consumers have so much more choice, flexibility, and arguably power now. However, this argument could be countered with an argument that says that having full control over one's own media consumption is actually disempowering. The rationale for this is that we maybe don't always know what's good for us. That might sound patronising, but let's think about news coverage and documentaries. Back in the times of minimal channels and no catch-up, wouldn't people have been more likely to catch a news bulletin or documentary about a current affairs issue because that was what was on at the time? And with full choice now, might a consumer choose never to watch news or documentaries? And isn't it problematic to be uninformed about what is going on in the world around us? But you might say, consumers get newsy content all the time on social media due to their friends sharing it. That may be so, but what if you don't have friends who share such content? And is it okay to be constantly only consuming extremely brief, undeveloped news pieces? Maybe if they're well done, it is. And more crucially, what if the news you see on social media is from a disreputable source and isn't fact-checked in the way professionally produced news coverage would be? Is it possible for us to be news media literate and to be able to differentiate between the value and function of different sources if we don't ever see the mainstream ones? It's an interesting debate, isn't it? Why not do a Google search for media dumbing down and read about some of the voices in this debate that's been ongoing for many, many decades and will probably continue to be ongoing for many, many more. And of course, don't forget to differentiate between the reputable and the non-trustworthy sources in your research. Finally, for this video, do you media stack or do you media mesh? Or have you any idea what I'm talking about? My guess is that when you're watching TV or a Netflix or Prime show on your laptop or tablet, you probably also do things on your phone. Maybe not constantly throughout the show, but now and again. Would I be right? If so, you are either media stacking or you're media meshing, and you probably do both at different times. The difference is that media stacking is where you are using 2 or more media devices simultaneously, and what you are doing with them is unrelated. So, say you're watching Love Island and you're WhatsApping your friends about meeting up later, or you're checking out an influencer's Instagram post about their latest purchase, or both. Media meshing is where you're watching Love Island and you're WhatsApping your friends about what's currently happening on Love Island on the screen in front of you, or you're searching a Love Island hashtag on Instagram to see what others are saying about what's going on in the episode that's on in front of you, or both. This probably seems like second nature to you, but it's quite a new thing, in my sense of new at least, since having smartphones and other similar devices became the norm. Try to observe the media stacking and media meshing that goes on around you, especially when you're in your family home. Is there any difference in the extent to which people of different generations do it? Or what exactly they're doing when they do it? Again, why not do a Google search and find out what different people and organisations are saying about whether media stacking and media meshing are good or bad for us? What do you think about it yourself? Well, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed exploring media producers and consumers with me, and that it's got you thinking about your own and others' media consumption and production. Bye for now.